think it's safe to say that most people would agree that Duke Nukem 3D was a hugely successful and innovative shooting game, lauded for its level design, visuals, and just all-around ass-kicking attitude. And much like Doom before it, there were plenty of other games that used its graphics engine, known as the build engine, to their own ends. Games like Blood and Shadow Warrior, for instance, and these games did a really good job at it. Then there were the others that weren't so great or well known, you know, like William Shatner's Tech War, Witch Haven, and the utterly horrible Extreme Paintball. Also, case in point, two war-themed games developed by TNT Team, the first called NAM and the second, WWII G.I. Not to be confused with Team TNT, who worked on Final Doom. Now, these are two very similar themed games released in 1998 and 1999 respectively, and are actually some of the first war-themed FPS games ever made for the PC. Whereas Blood and Shadow Warrior used the build engine as their canvas, NAM and WWII G.I. are basically just nothing more than total conversions for Duke Nukem, changing little more than the visuals and items on offer. The menus, heads-up display, and even some of the weapon and sprites are ripped straight from Duke Nukem 3D. The music is a few MIDI tracks that are looped over and over and are downright forgettable. Now, NAM should really be self-explanatory from its title. You're fighting as a US Marine in the Vietnam War, taking on waves and waves of VC troops as you move from level to level, searching for a jeep that takes you to the next stage. Your basic weapon is an M16 rifle, and you've also got an M60 machine gun, a rocket and grenade launcher, as well as a basic pump-action shotgun. All of these are just basic CG renders converted into the game's engine, and they feature little to no animation, which is a bit of a bummer. If you've played Duke Nukem 3D, you'll instantly realise which weapons they replace, and they feel and function the same for the most part. Now, these weapons are cool initially until you realise that pretty much every single weapon in the game kills your enemies in 1 or 2 hits. So you'll never really have much use for something like a slow-firing shotgun, or even the grenade launcher for that matter, when you can easily dispatch twice as many VC in the same amount of time with the M16 or M60. I found myself using the M60 most of the time, mostly because I think that gun is badass and was also used in another great build engine game called Exhumed, but also because when you fire it, it lights up the area, helping you spot VC troops. Now, on that note, I'm not sure if this was an intentional design choice, but holy shit on a stick, this game is dark at times. Most of the levels take place at nighttime, and it is almost impossible to see your enemies. The level designers were also fond of putting bad guys behind trees or in corners in a way that means whenever you turn around a corner or move past them, they're often given a free shot at you. It's not the best looking game of its time, though the environments are quite well laid out, with lots of foliage sprites giving the sense of being in an actual jungle. But the actual structure to everything is really linear. There is very little difference between each mission, and they're also full of invisible barriers, preventing you from leaving the beaten path. You just kind of walk in a single direction, killing everything in your way, until you find the jeep that ends the level. You have a similar movement speed to what was in Duke Nukem 3D, but a run-and-gun shooter this is not. It's actually downright surprising how quickly you die in this game. Regardless of what difficulty mode you choose, enemies kill you in a matter of hits, if not instantly. Enemies at machine gun nests, for instance, will literally rip you to pieces before you even see them. And even your standard VC grunts can mess you up pretty damn quick. I think there's literally 1 or 2 enemy types in the entire game, and the only real difference between them is their appearance and the weapon they use. In terms of how they act, they'll just walk around until you're spotted, then fire at you. Brilliant stuff. Why they've even got difficulty modes is just beyond me, and I didn't even really see any difference between these modes at all. I would even go so far as to say that playing through this game is the most I've ever died in any single shooting game, perhaps ever. This is not hyperbole, you will die a ridiculous amount. I'd say easily 50 to 100 times. Half the time I get blown up or killed by something I can't even see, and I just sit there scratching my head before whacking that quick load button and trying it again. Making it past certain areas just boils down to luck, whether or not the AI spazzes out for a couple of seconds so you can return fire unscathed. It's just a roll of the dice. You'll go on a tear here and there, but more often than not, you'll be cut to ribbons the moment you stick your head out of cover. There's 2 episodes in total, with 7 or so levels per episode, and each level will roughly take you anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes to complete, depending on how often you die, but the levels themselves are easy enough to navigate. Just quick save often and you'll be fine. There are some positive points to it. I mean, the sound in general is actually pretty damn good. There's some great radio chatter, and the VC troops do actually speak Vietnamese. All of the explosions and Atmos stuff going on during some of the game's larger scale battles is pretty impressive, and it is one of the first Vietnam War themed FPS games ever made. So, you know, you've got to give it props for that. Roughly 1 year later, and TNT Team followed up with World War II G.I. Similar in concept to NAM, only instead taking place during the Second World War, as if that wasn't obvious from the game's title. Again, you play the role of a US soldier taking part in 2 episodes set across various stages. Like NAM, these levels are pretty linear once again, and all you kind of do is move through what is essentially a giant corridor, looking for a radio this time that you interact with to end the level. World War II G.I. is a little bit shorter than the first game, however, only offering up 6 levels per episode. As you'd expect, your weapons are reskinned to fit the period, so you've got a Thompson and Browning machine gun, sniper rifle, grenades, rocket launcher, etc. Each level or mission, if you like, starts off with your commanding officer giving you your basic orders and a rundown of what you're supposed to do, which, as I said earlier, often involves little more than just navigating a straightforward environment to find what is essentially the exit button. The last mission in the game requires you to escort a soldier through an occupied town, and there's also a couple of missions where you have to hold out against German forces until reinforcements arrive, but that's about as far as your variety goes. World War II G.I. also suffers from the crushingly difficult shooting mechanics of the first game. And likewise, you'll find yourself dying frequently to the point that I actually find it kind of comedic. Much like the first game, the only way to often pinpoint where the enemy is just to walk out, let them kill you, so the death cam focuses on where they were coming from. However, on the flip side, you got something more of a fighting chance in this game thanks to the ridiculously overpowered weapon that is the MP40. I'm not even joking, this thing is accurate down to the pixel. And you can just stand there 100 meters away from a cluster of enemies and let loose with this bad boy, and it will rip everyone to pieces. Anyway, aside from that, it really is just a reskinned version of NAM, which, as I mentioned before, is a reskinned version of Duke Nukem 3D. I guess the biggest question you've got on your lips right now is, should you play it? And that's really a tough question to answer. My gut instinct tells me no, simply due to the horribly coded damage that the player takes from enemies. That just makes the game ludicrously tough almost the entire time. And you know, maybe these guys are trying something new and thought they'd make a game a bit more realistic with the way the player takes damage, but dying a couple dozen times a level from enemies that can kill you in a heartbeat isn't fun. It isn't even skillful. You could be the greatest FPS player in the world and you'd still fall prey to these woeful enemy placements and damage counts. But you know, on the other hand, even a bad shooting game on the build engine is still pretty fun to play to an extent, except for WWII. That game can just go fuck itself. That year between the first and second game, though, really did take its toll on the overall experience, and World War II G.I. feels dated in oh so many ways, making it seem much less impressive and also making it much harder to forgive a lot of its shortcomings. On that note, I guess the reason most people never heard of this game could be summed up in a few words. Words like Half-Life, Quake, and Thief. Yeah, these games all came out around the same time. So, you know, why would anyone be interested in a 2-year-old graphics engine when some of the greatest truly 3D FPS games of all time are hitting the market? But I'm getting sidetracked. Look, if you're after a good Vietnam War game, then something like Viet Cong is worth checking out. Or if it's a World War II itch that needs scratching, then a game like Medal of Honor Allied Assault will also hit the spot. However, if you really do want to give these games both a try, a quick Google search will provide download links in seconds, and they both run pretty flawlessly in the EDuke source port. And if nothing more, they're a great early and quirky example of war games before the genre had found its footing, with more polished and enjoyable titles like those in the Medal of Honor series.